What is going on, everybody? Jumbo Thick here, and this will be our first Q&A video. Well, I will answer viewer and subscriber questions that you leave in comment sections and whatnot. And I might have rushed this one a little bit, so didn't get as many questions as I was hoping. But let's make do with what we have for now, and I might reach back and answer some questions, re-answer some questions that I have answered previously on comments in older videos that I know a lot of people don't go back and look at comments often, so this will be a good avenue to drum up the old conversations and have everybody get a chance to actually get in on the discussion. So that's going to be the idea behind a lot of these videos, is to get to know me better so I can get to know you guys better, so we can learn together and experience new things. So with that being said, let's get into the first question. My first question comes from Preston, and he asks, why don't you do live streams? And I do have a very good answer for that question. I live in a rather small town in Arkansas, of all places, in the US, if you don't know where that is. And I have really bad internet. It's not terrible, but it's not fast enough for me to actually do any streaming. It takes me a while just to upload a video even. So streaming is probably out of the question. And on those days that you've seen me in the past where I upload 2 or 3 videos at once, that's while I'm elsewhere. I'm not at my house and I have access to higher speed internet, and so I can do things like that. But for the most part, this is me. This is all I got. So sorry guys, until I either move or they start offering faster internet here, that's all I can do. So let's move on to the next question. My next question comes from Hank. He's been a long-time subscriber, Hank Trim. And he asks, I'm primarily interested in your lore videos. It would be nice to learn more about the races that haven't been included in the game, say ogres and chaos dwarves. Do you have any plans to look at them? And then there's a second part. Alternatively, it might be cool to learn more about the epic conflicts between Warhammer factions, say the war between Pestilence and Sotek. Any interest in doing a video on that? Finally, do you have a Patreon page? And so on and so forth. So, to answer the first question, I definitely want to hit all of the major races and the minor races that exist in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. That is definitely a plan. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take me to establish said plan. I wanted to hit... I've got several ideas coming up for the next faction I'm covering. I'm almost done with Lizardmen. I want to cover the 2 current legendary lords that we have. As soon as I'm done with that, I will be moving on to the next faction. And I'm going to let it be a little bit of a surprise. It might surprise some of you guys who it's going to be. And I think that you might be getting one of your wishes come true. Let's just put it like that. Now, your second question, the epic conflicts, like the big battles. If there's enough interest after, or even during, if there's enough interest in me doing some of the larger scale wars that have gone on, like the War of the Beard, or we pretty much covered the Sundering and the Dark Elf stuff, but if you want a more detailed, this happened, I can definitely do that for you guys. I'm pretty adept in most of those conflicts, and I'd be more than willing to do it for you guys if you really wanted it. And as far as Patreon, I do not have a Patreon set up. I'm not saying I never will do it, but as of right now, that's not what I'm on YouTube for. I don't want... My goal on YouTube is to just express myself, and I felt like I had something I could bring to the lore community. I know a lot of the other YouTubers, not personally, but I've been a long-time YouTube fan, if you say that, and a lot of these other guys helped me get into Warhammer, but there were just certain things that most people tend to leave out of their videos, like the little details, and I wanted to bring that to all of you guys. And so it's my take on a subject that has been covered by a fair amount of YouTubers that I know of, at least the bigger ones. And I'd be more than open to collaborations if any of them wanted to collaborate, if they wanted to do something together. That'd be awesome. But as far as Patreon, I don't feel like I'm even big enough yet to even warrant setting up something like that. So thank you, Hank. And if anything ever comes up and I'm ever like, hey, I need to do a Patreon, or hey, I need to make some more money on YouTube to warrant me still doing this, then we will revisit this topic. But as of now, I'm doing this for fun, and that's the way I'd like to keep it for now, at least. So we'll see if I sell my soul 2 years from now or something crazy like that. You never know what's going to happen in the future. But as of right now, I am sticking to my guns, and I'm doing this for fun. So that hopefully answers your question for now. Let's move on to the next one. The next question is from Zanzalin. I probably mispronounced that. Sorry, man. And it says that, are you only answering questions for Fantasy or Age of Sigmar? Which, we'll get into that. 1, what is your favorite race in Warhammer, Fantasy, or 40k, or both? Okay. 2, do you collect the minis? If so, what do you have? And 3, an Age of Sigmar question. Skaven in the Age of Sigmar, where do they hide out? What realms do they inhabit? What do you think of them being bundled in with Chaos? Okay, so this is going to be kind of a big topic, but let's go with the first one. My favorite race in Warhammer, Fantasy, and then 40k. Let's see here. I'm not as well versed in 40k, but as far as race in Warhammer, man, that's a tough one for me. That's very tough. I really do enjoy the Skaven, probably a little bit too much, like creepily enjoy them. I'm also a big Slaaneshi fan. I know that's kind of creepy, but I definitely enjoy some Slaanesh, and it's really hard for me to choose between them. So, and I also have got a weird fetish for Dark Elves. That's the whole Slaaneshi aspect. So those are the 3 that I'm very, it's hard, I can't pick. So those would be my top 3. I don't know what order they'd fall in, but we'll do that for now. As far as 40k, now I'm not as well versed in 40k, like I already said. I know the basics of 40k, and I probably know a little bit more than the average person that isn't in 40k. I definitely know more than that. And as far as races, now I've never actually played the tabletop 40k, so judging just from lore perspective, I would probably say, the Tyranids seem very interesting. I kind of like them, and the Chaos Space Marines they just look awesome. I'm kind of if you haven't noticed, I like the darker races for sure. They just seem like more fun to me, but regular Space Marines as well. I mean, they're pretty awesome. So that's just a hard one to choose. Now, as far as Age of Sigmar, now I might be getting on a little bit of a soapbox here. I didn't really get into tabletop gaming. I just didn't have the money for it at the time, and now I'm to the point where I'm so old that I wouldn't know anybody if I decided to start doing tabletop gaming, especially in such a small town. So that's probably never going to happen. I never owned any of the minis. I always thought they were super cool. I'd go in and look at them and all of that. And I started learning lore and things like that, but I just never played. I never did it. So I don't have any of my own personal armies. But if I did get some armies, it would be one of those 3 I stated earlier. You know what? I also forgot. I really like Beastmen too. See, this is why I write scripts, because I get off on tangents. Now, as far as Age of Sigmar is CA's answer to the problems they were having with Warhammer Fantasy. So Warhammer Fantasy, from what I've drummed up, what I can tell from all the research and everything I've done, was invented in the 80s, so it's a long time ago. They didn't realize how big it would get, and 40k obviously came shortly after that, and it did game busters. It's fantastic. So essentially, they wrote a lot of lore into the original Warhammer Fantasy that is not very family friendly to today's audience and the people that they are trying to reach to come play again. And for instance, one of their big things was they invented Slaanesh. Now, that's one of the reasons why I enjoy the fantasy setting, because it has such a dark theme to go with it. And 40k has this as well, but 40k is doing so well that they're not going to change 40k. Well, I say that they could. It would be stupid if they did. But anyways, they decided that they needed to find some way of pulling in the younger crowd, and it's hard to do that when there are demons with boobs and like naked people all over the place and rape, and I'm probably gonna get censored for saying this on YouTube, but it gets pretty bad when you start going into Slaanesh. So they were looking for a way to cop out of that. It's so deep in the lore. It's very prevalent in Dark Elf and, of course, in like Chaos worshipping and things like that. So they just decided to wipe the slate clean, and they're like, well, we need to get rid of Slaanesh. So we're coming up with this new thing, and we're going to make it just like 40K, but it's in the fantasy setting. We're going to have Space Marines. They're called Sigmarites, and on paper that all's like, oh, that might be kind of cool. But the way they went about it was bad. It was really bad the way they went about it. They could have twisted some things in the lore and managed to pull this off. I didn't see the reason for them to completely end it, but they did. So I'm not a fan of Age of Sigmar yet. Now, I'm not as well versed in the lore, but I do know what happened to the Skaven, and they essentially replaced Slaanesh with the Horned Rat. So he's now one of the ruinous powers, like the greater ruinous powers. He was always a ruinous power, but now he's up there with the other three. And Slaanesh is pretty much for the most part, he's gone. So they eliminated all of those things in one fell swoop, and I can kind of see where they're coming from a business perspective, but from somebody that enjoys the fantasy setting, it cut me deep. It cut me very deep when I found out that they ended everything. I still haven't read, personally, all of the End Times novels. I've been putting them off as long as possible for this very reason. But eventually I will have to read them for myself. I know what happens for the most part, so I just don't know all the little details. But eventually I'll probably cover End Times as well, so you can look forward to that. But hopefully I answered your question. I got off on a tangent there as well, but that's all I really know about Age of Sigmar, and I don't know, maybe someday when I cover what I want to cover in the Warhammer Fantasy setting, maybe I'll do Age of Sigmar lore, maybe I'll get invested in it, and I don't know how good it is. I know a lot of the current heroes and gods, quote unquote, of Warhammer Fantasy become gods in the Age of Sigmar and things like that, and all the conversions and all the races come back, and it seems interesting, and that's always a possibility for the channel. You never know. So hopefully I'll answer your question, and I'm going to move on to some older questions that I've been asked in the past, and we will rehash them here for the Q&A. So the next question is asked by the Knight of Autumn, and it was on one of my older Skaven lore videos. Something I would love to know: is it understandable that a clan rat, that a clan rat or slave rat is physically weaker than a human, but what about one that isn't starving, one with black fur? So, to answer this, in case you don't know, rat men are they're comparable to a average human size. Now, the difference is in their biology, they don't have muscle mass the way that a human does. And so they are naturally significantly lighter, I guess I would say. They're lighter than an average human. And an average man is actually relatively strong. They're like the norm. Okay, let me go back on this. So a human would be like the midline. They are the average strength rating that you compare everything else to. So there are several races that go above them, but there's also a lot of races that go below them. And so Skaven and elves are actually below human as far as like physical strength is concerned. They're not nearly as strong, but they're also a lot more swift than they are. So there is that, and if you go to comparing them with Bretonnians, for instance, or Northskins, which are technically still human, it's hard to make the comparison. But anyways, I'm getting off the topic here. So as far as the Skaven, now for the most part they have a severe food problem. That's why they're always cannibalizing each other, and food is it's just hard to come by when you're feeding millions and possibly billions of rat men every day, and seeing how their metabolism is so quick that they eat almost their full body weight in food a day. So that's just insane how much food they actually need to survive. And for that reason, the majority of the Skaven armies, like you just said, are clan rats and Skaven slaves and whatnot, are severely malnourished. So that does make them a lot weaker than a average person. But at the same time, if you get into the lore and you read some of the novels, the storm vermin are still, they are the healthiest probably unit that you'll see on the battlefield, outside of like a lord, or like a gray seer, or somebody higher up in society. Then a storm vermin is probably just on par with a human as far as strength is concerned. They might be a little bit stronger because occasionally, since their bodies are so infused with warp stone and everything else and mutations and whatnot, some of them do get a little bit larger than people. Now, not huge. When they start getting too big, then you're looking at a rat ogre. You're not looking at a rat man anymore. So I would say that on average, even a well-fed Skaven is not going to be... It might match a human for strength, but I don't think that he'll be stronger. In my opinion, that's my personal opinion. This is all just a position. Oh God, I can't use my words anymore. This is all speculation. So it's nowhere in the lore to say this, this, and this. But in my opinion, even a well-fed Skaven is not going to be as strong as a human can be. And when I do say that, I do mean like a well-trained, well-regimented human warrior. Now, average, I don't know, peasant or, the baker or something, they might be able to give them a run for the money, but a well-fed, strong human warrior, I think that it's hands down, they're going to beat them out in strength. Now, speed is the thing with Skaven. They're just so quick that's how they get the biggest advantage in close combat with humans. They're so fast that it's hard for us to deal with how quick they are, but that diminishes over time because they also tire out a little bit quicker than we do, because their metabolism is so high that they burn energy so quickly that they actually will tire out quicker than an average human. And for that reason, you can really grind them down, which is not something humans are usually good at. They're not usually good at grinding down another race. That's not a thing, because most races can have far more stamina than a human does. So we can actually grind them down and just physically overpower them when it comes out to a long, drug-out fight. So the Skaven very much rely on their sneaky, like, dastardly hit-and-run tactics. And even when it comes to a pitched battle, they're biting and they're using their tails, and they don't fight fair whatsoever. So there is that. So hopefully that answered your question. And let's move on to the next one. The next question was asked, it's a while ago, by Kugelfang. He asked, are there any lizardmen mercenaries working in the land of the border princes or something? I imagine a few saurians and skinks would have been bred for that specific purpose of being sent out across the world so they would be able to learn from and understand the other races of the Warhammer world. Now, I did reply because I didn't look at it at first because I completely forgot about it. I was like, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I didn't think there would be any. But then again, it was brought to my attention. I was like, yeah, well, there's a Dogs of War regiment. I was like, oh man, I completely forgot about the Dogs of War regiment. There is, in fact, a single Lizardman Dog of War mercenary unit. Now, if you don't know what Dogs of War are, it was almost like a supplemental army book where you could have mercenaries in your army and tabletop, and that's kind of what it was invented for. Now, some of the units are just supposed to be funny, honestly. They weren't invented very seriously, and a lot of them conflict with lore as well. So in this aspect, I actually did some research into them, and they're called Tihichi Huichi's Raiders. And this is how old it is. This was in 4th edition, I believe, is when the Dogs of War book came out. And
it has the skinks riding cold ones. Now, if you saw any of my recent lizardman videos, you would know that it specifically says in the lore that cold ones are so dangerous that it takes such a powerful will, and you have to be powerful enough to stay away from their snapping jaws to even dominate the cold ones. Dark elves have a hard time doing this, and even the Saurus, who traditionally ride the cold ones, have a hard time doing this. So in this aspect of this lore, and it is old lore, so I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I'm also saying that it conflicts a lot with the current lore. And it's basically has a bunch of skinks riding cold ones, and it says they're mercenaries, but they're not really mercenaries if you read into it. They are basically the last survivors of a temple city that was destroyed, and the Slan, before he died, set them out to go recover the items of the old ones that were lost. And so essentially all the skinks don't even really communicate that well with the people that are hiring them, and what they do is they join up with the first army that they come across, who then they hunt this other group of units for them from a different army. They'll find a relic of the old one magically on each army they come to, and that's just how it keeps going. Whoever they fight and murder ends up paying them afterwards and saying, hey, here's this relic, will you come fight for us and do this? And they think of it as the will of the old ones, because they're not losing any battles, they're not losing a lot of skinks, and it's kind of it's a little bit of a gimmick, I'm not gonna lie. Now, I do plan on doing a Dogs of War lore video, but I want to save that for much later, once I've covered most of the existing factions. So look forward to that eventually, someday, somewhere, somehow. You guys are probably sick of me saying that, but in this instance, I will admit I was wrong, guys. I was wrong, and I was wrong, and then I was right at the same time, though. Let's be honest here. It is extremely old lore. So I do like to preface that whenever I am doing a lore video. I like to tell you guys, hey, this is old lore. It might not be canon or things like that. So just so you guys know. And hopefully that answers the question and everybody kind of knows what's going on here. And if you know something I don't, feel free to pipe in like this guy did. So let's move on to the next question then. Hopefully you guys aren't sick of my rambling at this point, but the next question, and the last I'll probably be answering for this Q&A, comes from the Rising Theurg, I think I'm saying that right. So this is in response to my old one lore video. And it says, couldn't they just create a caste system with the many races they created? The old ones is what he's speaking of. With the lizardmen being at the top of the food chain and being the direct ambassadors and messengers of the old ones, so that they are the elite warriors. The elves could have been the mages, the priests, the artists, and long-range fighters in their army, archers and mages. The dwarfs could have been architects, scientists, smiths, and close combat fighters. And finally, as humans, being the underdogs, taping up each role they could fill in like substitute units. So, the reason why it didn't work out that way is because I don't think that the races, the lesser races is what how the lizardmen refer to everyone else, were intended for that purpose. Like, I think that if the old ones still stuck around, and if they did happen to still elevate all of the races that they did, for instance, they elevated the elves, the dwarfs, the humans, and it's speculative, but we think that they also were elevating, maybe not elevated, the ogres and the halflings. And there's also the giants may or may not have existed before. They might also be one of those races, but they would have been sky titans back then. So if they still elevated them and they were still around, I think that it would have worked out the way that you posed your question. They, in my opinion, the old ones would have been up here at the top of the food chain. Then you would have had the lizardmen, and then everyone else would have fell in line below them in an ideal scenario. But since it happened the way it did, we are led to believe that the only reason the old ones elevated these other races is because they found that their lizardmen were lacking in certain areas, and they couldn't combat the threat of the ever-changing chaos as effectively as they wanted them to. And so when the warp gates collapsed and the old ones essentially stopped existing, they were trying to prevent that, or at least they were trying to prepare the world so that it would not end, is kind of the idea I get from it. And so the other races and essentially were created to combat chaos in their own unique way. Now, how long it took for the warp gates to collapse and all this, I kind of go into that in my old one video, and no one really knows. There's no set timeline really, so it's hard to really give you a straightforward answer on that. But at the same time, the way that it all went down is the Lizardmen were created. They were not as effective in dealing with chaos, so then the elves were created to be more magical and in nature and things like that, but then they ended up being weak in other areas. So then the dwarves were created, and they had the same problem. Then men were created, and then they had an even bigger problem because the men were good at what they needed to be good at, but then they were also being corrupted because of it. So it all gets kind of convoluted, and I went over this a little bit in my old one video. So hopefully I answered your question, and I think that's the reason why it played out the way it did. And in an ideal scenario, if the old ones were still sticking around and they were still here, I think it would have worked out the way that you were talking about in the question. So hopefully that answered it. And that is going to be the end of our first Q&A video, guys. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for we hit 500 subscribers. That's the whole reason why I'm doing this video. If you guys like the Q&A, go ahead and leave me a comment down in the comment section, and I will try to add this into the rotation. And what I will do is, anytime I get comments or questions in my regular lore videos, I'll add them to this. Or if you guys just want to ask a question, you can drop it in one of these at the bottom of these Q&A videos, and hopefully I will see it and we will get it all put together. So that's going to be the idea. That's how I'm trying to bridge the gap with you guys. If you and you don't have to ask me just Warhammer questions. You can ask me personal questions. You can ask me whatever. I'll do my best to answer whatever I can. So with that being said, thank you guys for your support. I greatly appreciate it. The channel is growing. We're doing great. Everything's happening. It's happened a little bit faster than I thought it would. So there is that. And that's all I got today, guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for your support. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. And that's going to be it. So as usual, I have been Jumbo Thick. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Have a good day.